Hello and welcome to Spill the Tea with G. For as long as I've loved film, I have to say that my favourite form of it always has been and always will be animation. Ever since I was a kid, I was enamoured by the endearing yet emotionally rich worlds of Brad Bird's Ratatouille and The Incredibles, and as I've come to grow up, I've fallen even more in love with the medium through the endlessly colourful world of Studio Ghibli, or even the dystopian thalassophobic hellscape of Angel's Egg. Animation has always struck a chord with me personally, and in recent animation history, I've had a particular level of admiration for DreamWorks Studios, because whether they're pushing something incredible or something absolutely awful, they are a studio that makes sure they are always pushing something. As a studio that always seeks to be innovating, every single film that DreamWorks produces, even if it's small, tries to innovate in some way. From its first film of The Prince of Egypt, it mixed 2D and 3D animation in a way that was more ambitious and more seamless than anything we'd really seen before. With their big breakthrough hit of Shrek, it adopted a brand of humour satirising the fairy tale in a way that we had never seen before. Not only that, but even their not so great films like the Bee Movie later on, which by the way, I love the Bee Movie, it's one of my favourite films, but still nonetheless, it took that brand of humour that Shrek had and pushed it even further into the rowdiness, made it even more potentially controversial, because whether they are producing something absolutely irredeemable like Shark Tale, or an absolute timeless classic like the Kung Fu Panda trilogy, DreamWorks is a studio that is always trying to chart the uncharted, always trying to create something that no one has seen before and bring something into the medium of animation that we have yet to be exposed to. And unfortunately, it is this reason for which I love DreamWorks, is the very same reason the recent live-action How to Train Your Dragon remake is not only, in my opinion, a pretty mediocre film, but is by an absolute landslide the worst of any of the live-action remakes we have received from Disney, Pixar, or any studio currently working in the last 20 years. And I'm fully aware that is an audacious opinion to have, and I fully understand that there are other recent live-action remakes like Snow White that I would agree are objectively worse than How to Train Your Dragon. But I believe that this version of How to Train Your Dragon is by far the worst live-action remake we've gotten, and it is because it stands against everything DreamWorks for its history as a company has existed for, and is a film that stands in the pursuit of absolute nothingness. So let's get into it. Let me start right off the bat with a walking contradiction. This film is pretty great. A well-paced, beautiful story of friendship between a dragon and a boy forced against him, yet through compassion and understanding a bond forms, and together they create something truly special that turns the town around. Its costumes are gorgeous for a Viking film, the acting is pretty good, and the story overall comes together to form a generally cohesive work of cinema, which is more than I can say for Snow White and many other films of the live-action remake projects. The issue with this is that every positive comment I have just made has been made entirely benign by the existence of the first film. Everything this film does, from the performances, the character designs, the pacing of the dialogue, everything is shot for shot identical yet comes across as a dampened version of the original, as if the first film has given birth to a depressed version of itself and put it into cinemas. Anything good this film has to offer is made entirely useless by the fact that it is done better elsewhere. Despite being a product of a capitalistic system of cinematic production, it fails as a capitalist artifact by failing to provide anything that separates it from its own predecessor that it placed itself in competition with. However, I must say I don't blame the filmmakers or actors for this entirely, because one of the issues this film has is that it tries to compete with the emotional and visual expressiveness of the animated form. Take for example Hiccup and Stoic. A crucial part of both characters is Stoic's largeness and Hiccup's skinniness, providing us with an insight into both their positions within the community and difference between one another despite their father-son relationship. Yet no existing human will be an absurdly large as Stoic or as skinny as Hiccup. I like their performances as these characters within the film, and yet, before they have even begun acting, their inherent forms fail to convey the same level of information as the original. The acting is also at times devoid of the same expression the animated version was so rich with, which leads into a larger issue. When the film does replicate, whether it's the dialogue, shots, or locations, it does so without anything that made the first film. The dialogue is paced in a way that's exponentially worse, the locations are sapped of their colour and beauty, and the whole aesthetic is devoid of anything that might allow it to be a memorable film. However, you may be asking why this causes me to estimate it so poorly. There are far worse films, and I would tend to agree. Yet I must connect this all back to the DreamWorks ethos of innovation. Every live-action remake so far has existed in the pursuit of something. Snow White tries to update the original with a more contemporary political subtext. The Lion King tries to push the boundaries of CGI beyond anything we'd seen before in film. Did I like any of these films? No. In fact, I think both The Lion King and Snow White are terrible movies overall. However, I will always choose a film that tries to be something and fails than a film that makes absolutely no attempts to be anything. To me, a person who tries flying into the sun and burning is far more admirable than someone who sits in a cave in fear of sunburn. Will the person in the cave survive? Yes. And so this version of How to Train Your Dragon is objectively better than I would say any of the Disney remakes. But to compliment this film for that is to tell the world that ambitionlessness is what we want, leading to a cinema that somehow is more aesthetically stagnant than the Disney Snow White. The shot-for-shot nature of this film makes me actively despise it because rather than taking the risk in the pursuit of something, it chooses to be nothing, sitting in solitary safety as it receives pats on the back from those who will happily sit and watch their own memories reflected onto them. So concerned with the happiness of the past, they have failed to see their own absence of a future. Unfortunately, there is nothing one can take from this film, ensuring that despite us thinking they'd reached the bottom of the bin, the live-action remake has entered a new phase of complete aesthetic nothingness. What else is there even to say? I thought it couldn't get any worse. But in a funny turnaround way, I've proven myself wrong here. At the start of this video, I said DreamWorks has always existed in the spirit of innovation. And in an ironic way, this film does innovate. It creates a live-action remake that, by some miracle, managed to be more aesthetically stagnant and more absolutely nothing than anything Disney had been putting out. Absolutely, wildly impressive.